This is MichMash, a weekly conversation where we try to unjumble an important and sometimes under-the-radar statewide story that affects you. I'm Cheyna Roth.
And I'm Alethia Kasben. The governor's race is heating up with candidates reporting their first fundraising hauls this week.
That's right. The Democratic field has appeared to settle, and all three candidates there announced what they raised ahead of Friday's evening deadline. The Republican field seems more in flux. And then, of course, there's Detroit Mayor Mike Duggan, who is also in the race as an independent candidate.
So let's start with the Democrats. Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson announced this week she raised $3.5 million in the first 6 months of her campaign, which is just a huge number. Her Democratic competitors also announced their fundraising hauls. Genesee County Sheriff Chris Swanson announced raising $1 million, and Lieutenant Governor Garlin Gilchrist announced $750,000.
So Benson has significantly outraised her competitors for the Democratic nomination, and her campaign said the haul is proof she is the best candidate to take on any Republican or independent in November 2026, which is debatable, but it sure helps.
You know, it is a lot of money. We'll see what it means in the future. But Benson, referenced taking on an independent candidate. She is, of course, talking about Duggan here, who is a longtime Democrat who has left the party to run without party affiliation. So Benson seems to be cementing her status as a favorite in the Democratic primary. And she's moving to say, hey, I know I have this other opponent out here who I would not have to face. She would not have to face him until November if they both make the ballot. So his presence still on her mind, still complicating the path.
Yeah, Duggan is hoping to get votes from both Democratic and Republican voters. He recently received the endorsement of the Detroit Regional Chamber, a very early positive get for Duggan. And it certainly gives his effort to run without major party affiliation some more juice and a bit of legitimacy for anybody who was thinking, well, this is just a non-starter.
And that endorsement could have gone to some of the other Metro Detroit candidates in the race, like John James, Jocelyn Benson, or Lieutenant Governor Gilchrist. The chamber has previously endorsed in primaries and then the general, much closer to the election. But of course, as mayor of Detroit, Duggan has worked very closely with the chamber for years, and their PAC endorsed him unanimously.
Now, on the Republican side, things, as we said, are a bit less settled. Former House Speaker Tom Leonard entered the race a month ago. A few weeks ago, Tudor Dixon, the Republican nominee in 2022, who lost to Governor Gretchen Whitmer, said she would actually not be getting in the race.
So that leaves Leonard, Eric Nesbitt, who is the current Senate Republican leader, U.S. Rep. John James, and former Attorney General Mike Cox as the main candidates in the race. So the Republican side is in flux for two reasons. One, because who still might get in. It doesn't feel completely done yet in that realm. And then also there is pressure for one candidate to get out.
Right. So Republican John James, who currently represents the 10th U.S. House District covering parts of Macomb County and Metro Detroit, he jumped into the governor's race in April, which leaves his congressional seat open in 2026. Now, Democrats are pretty thrilled about this. James won a very tight race in 2022, but now that he's an incumbent, he gets a really strong advantage in what would be an otherwise tough to unseat seat.
So opening the district gives Democrats a much better chance, and President Donald Trump's allies are concerned given the razor-thin majority Republicans have in the U.S. House. So Trump has previously endorsed James in other races. He joked recently he wasn't sure he was happy about James running for governor. Mike Rogers, who is a Republican running for U.S. Senate in Michigan, said recently James would have a lot of support if he decided to stay in his U.S. House seat. And Rep. Matt Maddock, another ally of Trump, said the president's team is unhappy with James's decision to run for governor. So all of this is just very unusual to have sort of this kind of pressure building behind the scenes, probably going straight to James. Some people are unhappy.
Yeah, and this is all happening in the backdrop of Trump and his allies pressuring other Republicans to seek re-election in the U.S. House rather than other offices. So James is not uniquely special here. The 2026 midterms could be a challenging year nationally for Republicans, and Trump really wants to keep the majority of both chambers. Just this week, U.S. Rep. Bill Huizenga, who represents the 4th U.S. House District, he actually backed away from a U.S. Senate bid, saying he was asked not to run by the president. They want him to stay in the U.S. House. He hasn't announced re-election plans yet, but clearly the president wants him to stay put, and he is considering that.
Then there is the question of, do more Republicans jump into the race? Remember, in 2022, which was not an open seat for governor, there was a massive field vying to take on Whitmer. Although several candidates had issues with petition signatures and only 5 ended up on the ballot, the field was up to 10 at one point.
So Kevin Rinke, one of the candidates who collected signatures and was a primary candidate in 2022, he is teasing a significant announcement in August, and he has been making the rounds for months. I do wonder what that announcement could be.
We are recording this on Thursday afternoon, and fundraising reports aren't due until 5 p.m. on Friday, so it is unclear right now what the field looks like in terms of funds raised. We know that Mike Cox, the former attorney general, said he raised $1.4 million, and we know that John James moved $500,000 from his congressional committee to his gubernatorial committee earlier this month. We are coming up on a year before the primary, so a lot can change between now and then. For now, Duggan continues to justify his independent run. The Democratic field seems settled, and the Republican race still has some questions swirling.
Still lots going on in this race. It is a marathon, not a sprint, which, we say that all the time, and yet I am still so tired already.
So tired.
Well, we're going to switch gears here. And after the short break, we're going to talk more about fundraising. And Lieutenant Governor Garlin Gilchrist is going to join us to talk about his entry into the gubernatorial race. You won't want to miss it.
Welcome back to MichMash. We are joined now by Lieutenant Governor Garlin Gilchrist, who is also running in the Democratic primary for governor. Lieutenant Governor, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be back.
So you are Governor Gretchen Whitmer's lieutenant governor, and you are now running for her job. Let's start with this. Why?
Well, as lieutenant governor, I have been to all 83 counties of Michigan 3 or more times. I've had thousands of conversations with people all across this state. And what they want is to have confidence that Michigan is a place where people can stay and succeed. I talk to families who are worried about that not being true for their kids. I think about people like my granddaddy who came up to Detroit from Alabama, in the 40s, and he came in search of opportunity, coming out of the Jim Crow South. And he knew that if he could just get to Detroit, he didn't have a job guaranteed when he came here, but he knew if he got here, there was so much opportunity that this was the place where he could succeed. 2 generations later, his oldest grandson, I questioned that. And, wanting to be a software developer after I graduated with 2 engineering degrees at the University of Michigan, I actually felt like the best place for me to pursue that career was on the West Coast and not in Michigan. And families have that anxiety. Their kids are going to leave and never come home. They feel like people may not see the right pathway for them to take their next step here in Michigan. But I know that we can make Michigan the place where you can stay and succeed, where there are job opportunities and economic opportunities here, where there's healthcare you'll be able to afford and access, and that will hold accountable the people who stand in the way of that, and that we will be able to make sure that this good government can provide a pathway to health and wealth for everyone. That's why I'm running for governor.
So 2026, of course, is a big election year in Michigan, and there, were a lot of options for, anyone seeking office. Did you consider running for something different? The U.S. Senate was also open. Did that, cross your mind when you were making this decision on what's next for you?
My conversations with people across the state of Michigan, people wanted a problem solver who could actually make things happen and fix broken systems. And that's what I've done as lieutenant governor, whether it is, accelerating the fact that now I brought thousands of new childcare centers online to help make childcare more affordable and accessible, brought tens of thousands of new housing units online through the record investment because housing is so unaffordable in so many parts of Michigan. And those are things that only a statewide executive as a governor can do. And so having had the experience in this role, having understood clearly what the challenges and opportunities were that people in Michigan face, I knew this was the best place for me to stay in public service if I chose to do so.
So because you've essentially given yourself 2 jobs now, you're lieutenant governor and you are a candidate, what does a typical day on the campaign trail look like for you?
I have one job, and that is to have as many conversations as possible with people across Michigan every single day, to listen to them, to go meet them where they are, and then to take what they tell me and go make something happen. So when people told me about, problems related to affordable housing and available housing in different communities, I drove the first investment in our state's community development housing trust fund in more than a decade. And frankly, the second investment that has been in it since the fund had been in existence, and use that to actually deliver new housing units, single family homes, apartments, in more places in Michigan, workforce housing. And frankly, it's come out at a faster pace than it ever has in the history of the state of Michigan. We need to go a step further now. We can do this. Our state doesn't have a housing tax credit. We can have a statewide housing tax credit that will accelerate more production, more units being online, more programs for affordability, and we can make those things happen going forward. And so my job stays the same, and that's listening to Michiganders and making things happen and to deliver results. And at a time when people have been so frustrated with progress not coming to them at all or not coming to them fast enough, people need a problem solver in office. And that's what I do as an engineer. I make systems work for people.
So in a lot of ways, lieutenant governors make perfect sense, to move on to the governor's job later after, they serve. But voters don't usually, agree with that. What are you doing to sort of change the trajectory that previous lieutenant governors have seen when they've run, for governor later?
Well, 2025 and 2026 are very different times than it was when any other lieutenant governor tried to run for office. And I'm the only candidate in this race in the Democratic primary who has delivered value in all 83 counties of Michigan, who has built relationships and spent time getting to know people all across the state of Michigan. I know that Michiganders want someone who's going to fight against the people who are holding them down or holding them back. It's going to fix problems and remove barriers that are standing between them and economic opportunity or jobs and possibility. They want people who can get and deliver them results. And I've demonstrated that in my service as Lieutenant Governor here in Michigan. And I'm someone who's going to continue to do that as the next governor, who's going to fight for them, who's going to work with them, who's going to make things happen, who's going to always protect Michigan's interests and make sure that good things can happen. And I'm the only candidate race who can say that, and therefore the best position to get it done.
You announced a $750,000 fundraising haul ahead of Friday's deadline. Did you meet your goal there? Is that a solid figure for you for this campaign?
Yeah, this shows that, we have been able to build something really extraordinary. I'm really proud to have support from Michiganders from every single county in the state of Michigan, reflecting the kind of statewide coalition that we can build. I'm also really proud that this is a campaign that the dollars are built not from MAGA or Wall Street billionaires, but from people who are working hard every day and want to invest in the future of our state. Our average grassroots donation was less than $17. I mean, that shows you that people are at the individual household level in Michigan are super excited about what we can build together and the kind of Michigan we can deliver, where everybody can, stay here and succeed and get the job that they dream of. And that I'm excited about and proud that movement is growing and only will continue to go up from here.
As Cheyna said, reports are due Friday, but the state's, new platform for campaign finance has seen some hiccups in the last few months. What do you, make of the transition on this site? And have you been able to actually, file your report? Do you think it's working ahead of Friday's deadline?
Well, I'm a person who has been able to make complex systems work for people to get them results. And I'll give you an example of that. And one of the most complicated technology projects that the state of Michigan has taken on, I was able to execute and implement something called Clean Slate, an automatic criminal record expungement program that makes it so that people who've been held accountable by the law have already served their sentence or served their time or whatever they needed to be held accountable for what mistake they made and what they did, now have full access to the economy because their record can be automatically cleared. That required connecting data systems from 83 counties, 81 county jail systems, and our court systems. None of them would talk to each other before. But I created a unified process that made it simple and easy and has already cleared automatically almost 2 million offenses from people's records, has gotten 330,000 people in a position now where they can have full access to an apartment or a job in this economy where small businesses are hungry to hire talented Michiganders. And that complex project, I made that system work for people and deliver economic opportunity and mobility for Michiganders. I've shown what it looks like to take a complex technology project and turn it into a win for Michiganders. And that's the kind of leadership that we're going to need. And so I don't know what's going to happen with this website, but I do know how to deliver solutions for Michiganders. And that's what I've done and will continue to do going forward.
Education is a huge issue going into 2026. statistics. Governor Whitmer has even made some comments about the state spending the most, but test scores still lagging. Do you have an education plan?
Yeah. First of all, education is super urgent to me, public education in particular, because my 3 children are students in Detroit public schools. I have twin rising 7th graders and a rising 1st grader. And here's what I know, that every single education professional that you interact with in Michigan, if you were to have a conversation with her or him, they would tell you exactly what it takes for every kid in their classroom to be able to move up, not just 1, but even 2 grade levels in 1 school year. All the interventions, all the investments, all the resources they would need. They would also tell you that they're frustrated that there are too many barriers that stand between them and being able to do the stuff that they know works. It's hard for them to do that, and it's hard for them to pivot away from things they know that don't work. My vision for education is grounded in the truth that educators know what these kids and families need, and we need to equip, empower, and resource them to be able to make those choices, to get those resources, to make it happen. And so that's what I'm grounded in, what I'm focused on. I trust those educators to be able to make it happen.
In gubernatorial races, when a governor of 2 terms is term limited out and leaving, Michigan voters tend to want to see some change, right? Like a lot of times we call these change elections. What are you telling voters to differentiate yourself from Governor Whitmer? Or do you think that's not necessary in this year? Like you said before, 2025, 2026, different years than we've seen in the past.
It's necessary to respond to the times. Look, when Governor Whitmer and I took office, we lived in a different world, TikTok was a music app, not the most important social media platform in the country and in the world. Artificial intelligence and the prospect of its impact on our economy was something that a lot of people were not thinking about. And it's front and center in a lot of people's minds now. And in those different and changing times, we need leaders who can respond to that directly. And I'm uniquely positioned to be able to do it. I have a degree in computer engineering and computer science. I've started and sold 2 technology businesses, software businesses in my career. I understand this better and have the experience in it that no one does in this race. And frankly, no one else does in the country who's competing for statewide elected office or holding it today. So that has prepared me to be able to help Michigan navigate this future that so many people are anxious about. When I talk to people, they want to know what this new technology is going to do for their job prospects, what this technology is going to do for their kids' job prospects going forward, or their community's economic identity going forward. Well, I can help Michigan navigate that to from a place that we know that Michigan will continue to be the place that makes the things that matter going forward, like we always have in our history, that we've navigated technological change before, and we can do it again with confidence because Michiganders are the smartest, are the most resilient people who can make anything happen when we set our mind to it. And so that difference is in the times, and I'm uniquely positioned to respond to these times. And that's what voters are hungry for.
I mean, hearing you talk about how different things were when you started in the governor's office to now makes me feel incredibly old, and I hadn't really thought about it. But yes, I never thought about AI when you guys were initially on the campaign trail. But anyway, so one candidate who's also really trying to distinguish himself is Mike Duggan, the mayor of Detroit. He's actually running as an independent despite his long history as a Democrat. What do you make of his candidacy?
He that's his decision. I'm not really here to comment on be pundit on his choices. But what I will say is this: people are hungry for results. People want people who can solve problems and they know have their back and that they can trust are fighting with them and are not going to turn their back on them and walk away from them. I've demonstrated that kind of leadership by making connections with people all across Michigan so they understand that I'm going to fight with them and for them. To make sure that we're going to work alongside each other to walk Michigan into this future where everybody can stay and succeed. That requires trust. That requires relationship. And that's, I think, what people are going to expect from leaders, especially we have in Washington a leader who so many people don't trust, who we don't know what his goals are or intentions are, who wakes up every day and says something different and random and dangerous. But no, here in Michigan, it amplifies the need for statewide leaders who you can trust, who won't turn your back on you, who have your interests in heart, not their own political or other interests. And that's what I deliver.
So speaking of, President Donald Trump in Washington, D.C., last week, we heard the news that this large, semiconductor plant in the Flint area is not moving forward. And there was, some finger pointing at sort of the national uncertainty being created by policies in D.C. What What was your reaction to that when you heard that this plant was pulling out? A lot of years of work, went into, planning for that.
My reaction was the same as the companies, that the environment that Donald Trump has created and this regime with the tariffs and just the lack of stability and coherence and competence happening when it comes to national industrial policy has led to this company saying that we can't trust the federal government enough to invest in America. And so that has cost this potentially transformational project and the tens of thousands of jobs that are really great paying jobs where people could support families from coming to mid-Michigan. And that's something that, that's the kind of risk that we should not tolerate from federal incompetence. And so I think this administration has demonstrated, though, that they haven't been able to set clear goals and get things done for people or lower costs or deliver the jobs of the future. So we have to work to make sure we can provide, as much stability and clarity as possible at the state level. That's what I'm going to do as the next governor.
If you were governor, would you want to change anything about the state's economic development policies? There's just constant, arguing over, what that should look like. States in this race to maybe throw money at companies to try to get them here. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes jobs are, reduced from the original modeling. Do you think, Michigan could change some of the things that it does? Or do you think this is, a system that works, but, sometimes deals fall through?
Look, we need to have all the options that we can. My approach to economic development is first and foremost grounded in Michiganders. Our resource is our talent, is our people, is the strength and will and smarts of Michiganders. And so first and foremost, we have to make sure that we are investing and positioning Michiganders to be the best qualified, best positioned, best credentialed to be able to do and make the things that matter going forward. When Michigan was the arsenal of democracy, we made the things that the country needed us to make. That's what we need to be thinking about. How do we make what America needs here in the state of Michigan? So I'm going to focus on equipping and positioning Michiganders to be ready to take those jobs, start those businesses themselves, or take advantage of those investments. I also know that we have to have a solid and strong infrastructure in terms of people having access to everything from water to public transit systems to build in communities that people know and want to live in and want to move to because they know that they can have a lot of options for their mobility. Grounded in those things, because when I talk to companies, I've talked to companies all around the world who are looking to invest in Michigan. And I have specifically one investment to come to Michigan from other states and other countries. And they say the first thing they want is talent. And the second thing they want is to be located in communities where people want to live because the infrastructure supports them, because there's transit and transportation options, because there are great schools that are fully funded. And so focusing on that is really important. That foundation, then we can have a conversation about what the other sort of programs and tools so that companies can say yes to investing in Michigan. And we need to have as broad a toolbox as possible from that regard.
The administration is currently dealing with the fallout of a $20 million grant going to Faye Baydoun, a Democratic donor who is now facing an investigation from the Attorney General's office and how she spent some of that money. Should this have been handled differently?
Look, this is under investigation, and so I look forward. I'm glad it's being investigated, and I look forward to the results of that investigation. We'll see what we learn.
So, we've got, the rest of this year and next year still in the lieutenant governor's office. What are your priorities for the rest of your term here?
Continuing to deliver results to make sure that we can get more housing units online quickly so that people can get the housing that they need here, whether it's workforce, temporary or permanent. Continuing to make sure that we can get we need to get this budget across the finish line. It's ridiculous that the legislature, and when I say that even more precisely, the Republicans in the state house have not taken seriously the fact that schools need to know what they're planning for as they do their budgets going into the fall. That needs to be done as soon as possible so that we can position these communities and the schools that serve them to be able to have predictability from their state. And so I'm hoping that gets done as quickly as possible.
All right, Lieutenant Governor, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.